Here we go.
Yeah. So, did you grow up here?
In Ogden?
Yeah.
Grew up in Clearfield, just outside of the city.
Okay.
Not much to do. It's a bad community for the base. So we found ourselves up here a lot, especially in high school.
Okay. I mean, that's like living in Ogden, isn't it?
It is like living in Ogden.
Yeah.
It's the Ogden Clearfield metro area for a reason. So,
And so, when did you start coming to Ogden a lot? Was it for college?
yeah, I moved to Ogden in 2011 when I first went to Weber State. That's where I met Sean, where we first got our first townhouse, our first apartment. And we left a little bit after college to do some internships in New York. But as the story goes, the mountains were calling and we came back.
What were you studying?
We studied musical theater together.
And so that's what you were interning in New York?
Yeah, we worked on Broadway, did the whole thing, worked on a few Broadway shows. Sean costumed, I did admin stuff for about 5-6 months, but
That's cool.
know.
So how was living there? Did you like it?
New York taught me a lot. It was probably the loneliest I've ever been in my whole lifetime, which is surprising because you're surrounded by, 15, 16 million people on a little island. And we didn't have any family. And, I'm 5th generation Utah through and through, and family is a big value for me. So it just felt lonely a lot of the time. But living in a big city, you learn a lot. You learn how resourceful you can be. I think we moved out there with, $20,000 in our savings and blew through that really quick. I remember when we got married, a friend who had lived in New York wrote us a card and he gave us like $200. And he said, when I lived in New York, every time I left my apartment, I spent $20. So here's 10 days of living in New York. So, but it's cool to be inspired by a big city like that. Learn what works, learn what doesn't work, learn how to build community. But yeah, it was a wake up call for us because I think we spent most of our early years living in Ogden chasing a dream, and we didn't think that dream was in Ogden.
Right.
And we learned quickly that wasn't the case. So.
Yeah, but don't you think that moving away sometimes just gives you that perspective and makes you appreciate where you came from?
Oh, absolutely.
It's like you think that you want to get away for something bigger, but
Yeah.
then once you go have a taste of that, it's like, wait, maybe
yeah.
I like home.
I like my
Well, and we left. We left in January of 2015. And one of my sisters was getting engaged in March, and so we flew home unexpectedly. About 2 months living in New York, and I got to see my only nephew at the time. And he was 2 or 3, and one of my sisters told me then that she was pregnant, and I just didn't want to miss out on those moments. I didn't want to miss out on those moments of being an uncle who lived across the country, and it instilled in me this value of like, it was there. It was a good reminder that family was important to me. And so we came back, and now we get to be the fun uncles to 7 incredible nieces and nephews and show up for them in the ways that we wouldn't have been able to had we stayed out there. So.
Right. That's cool.
The first time I ever heard about you was when you were getting married. Do you talk about the Macklemore story very much?
No, I don't actually. I don't.
Will you tell me just how that all happened?
Yeah. So, Sean and I met in 2011 at Weber State. And I was still in the closet. I wasn't out to many people at the time. And we started dating in early 2012. A year and a half later, we got engaged, and we planned to have like a really long engagement because I didn't want to get married until I was done with school, and I didn't want to get married without a plan of if we'd buy a house or if we'd move to New York. And so, in I don't know, the fall of 2013, we got a random message on Facebook that said, "Hey, my name is so-and-so, and I work for such and such production company, and we're looking for young queer couples who are engaged, who want to get married, and would you be interested in getting married on national television?" And we're like, "Well, can you tell us more details?" And they're like, "Well, not without you signing an NDA, and here's a contract, and all we can tell you is that you would be married on this day in January, and you have to show up in LA with your suits and basically trust that what we're saying to you is true."
And like buy your own tickets and everything.
Buy your own tickets. Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
And it was very scary, and it was very like, this is not real. But Sean is very resourceful on the internet. And so he started doing some Googling, and he Googled the production company, and the only thing they produce is the Grammy Awards. And we Googled when the Grammy Awards would be. And then we're like, oh, that's on January 26th. It's the Grammy Awards. And we're like, what can you tell us? And they're like, well, we can tell you that a very famous person is going to be the officiant of your wedding. So they will actually sign your wedding certificate. And we can tell you that several very famous people will sing at your wedding. That's what we can tell you. And so, we were actually in Hawaii when all of this was happening with my whole family. And my sister Sam is very risk averse, and she was like, "Oh, this doesn't sound real. They're going to take advantage of you." Blah blah blah. Sam.
Yes, I know
So, we did it. We bought 2 suits on a credit card because we were poor college students. Because again, I didn't graduate. I was going to graduate that year, but I wasn't graduated. And Sean's mom bought our plane tickets, and we stayed with Sean's sister, who was living in LA at the time. And we showed up on a Saturday for the rehearsal, and they said, "Okay, show up at the Staples Center." And it was the 65th annual Grammy Awards, and at the Staples Center, we found out that it was Madonna and Macklemore who would be singing with, featuring Mary Lambert, because Macklemore had just released his kind of hit song that year, "Same Love." And they're like, "Oh yeah, and Queen Latifah is going to sign your wedding certificate, your license." And so we're like, okay, that's wild. And the next morning we woke up and we took an Uber to the Staples Center, and we were in this big giant tent with 32 other couples from around the country. And yeah, it was fun. We got married on the Grammys, and Queen Latifah signed our wedding certificate. So
Yeah.
it was wild.
That is
awesome.
so wild.
It was wild.
Yeah.
Yeah, I watched it on TV.
I know. And that was the thing, is we couldn't tell anybody. I think like our wedding announcement that we shared with family and friends was we had to be very vague because we had signed the NDA. And we just told all of our friends, like, "Hey, turn on the TV. It's going to be on this station, and it's going to be at this time." And
I think that's what your sister said to us. They were like,
Yeah.
"We just really think you should come watch the Grammys with us."
yes.
I'm
yeah.
pretty sure I had an inside scoop.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No way.
And we were able to verbally tell our closest friends and family that this is what's going on. And, Sean's sister, because she lived in LA at the time, she was pretty smart, and she was able to find like a ticket to the Grammys. So we were able to have her in the stadium
wow.
with us.
That's cool.
But it was wild. Like just they lined us up underneath the stage. And we were just kind of standing there, and I don't really follow pop culture much. And like I'm standing there, and all these famous people are just walking by us, like Sandra Bullock and Willie Nelson and Chrissy Teigen and John Legend, who I didn't know. And like I'm just standing there, and like Chrissy Teigen's like, "Who are you?" And I'm like, "I'm Taylor." And she's like, "What are you doing here?" And I'm like, "We're about to get married." And she's like, "What? John, stop. John, come here and take a picture with these guys." And then like and I was like, "Sean, who is that?" Like, I didn't know. And he's like, "That's Chrissy Teigen. She's from Delta," which is where Sean's from. She was born in Delta.
She was
Delta,
born in
Utah?
Delta?
She was born in Delta, Utah. Not many
Wow.
people know that.
I didn't know that.
And then Ariana Grande walked out, and I didn't know who she was. She's like a Polly Pocket. She's very small.
Yeah.
And she had this big dress on, and she was like, "What are you doing?" And I'm like, "I'm about to get married." She's like, "That's so cool." And she like gave me a hug, and she walked away. I was like, "Who is that?" And Sean's like, "She just won Artist of the Year." So it was very, very kind of like, it was just a whirlwind of emotions, and of like, we stood in the aisles as Queen Latifah came on this stage, and like Ozzy Osbourne's like right by my butt, and we walked by like Katy Perry and Beyonce, and Katy Perry was like, "I'm so proud of you," and Sean was like, "I love you," and she hugged him and was like, "I love you." So it was wild. It was wild. And then like the days that followed, like we were getting press interviews from around the world, and we talked to people in Canada and in Brazil, and it was just crazy wild ride.
Yeah.
And then of course, that same June is when Utah passed the ban on gay marriage, or I guess the kind of step backwards on gay marriage. So it voided our marriage in the state of Utah, but of course that then laid the foundation for marriage to become legal. So we ended up doing a small ceremony in September of 2014 with friends and family here in Ogden. And then by 2015, our marriage was finally recognized with Obergefell. So
That's awesome.
crazy.
It's a great story.
Yeah.
But so then you graduated, your degree was in musical theater?
Yep.
But then
all things.
you went to work in like service basically right away, right?
Yeah. So I graduated in 2014 from Weber, and we took our internships. Well, I had worked for a few arts nonprofits kind of after graduation, kind of doing the thing. Sean was working at the Home Depot call center of all places. And when we decided to move to New York, we came back, and I actually moved home in advance of Sean because Sean was finishing his contract, and I just wanted to, I was so alone in New York City, and I wanted to be back home with family. So I lived with my oldest sister for a few months while Sean was still in New York. And actually I didn't have a job, didn't know what I was going to do. But when I landed in Salt Lake City, I got a call from my old boss at Weber State, and he was like, "Hey, this job just came open. You'd be great for it. Do you wanna take it?" And that was a Thursday, and by Monday I had a job. Like that's Ogden for you though, right? Like Ogden shows up for people.
Yeah.
And I started working for Weber State, and then kind of the rest is history. I worked for Weber for about a year in that role, kind of doing Office of Cultural Affairs. So I was responsible for busing young kids up to Weber to experience like the theater and the music and the dance. And then at the same time, I was like, you know what, like I want to change. I want to do something differently. So that's when I got my job at United Way and started doing community engagement full time, because that Weber job really laid the foundation. And when I was at Weber, I was a student worker that did that job, but as a student worker. So I did community engagement from basically 2011 in Ogden, 2011 to about 2018. So.
And so was it, were you fundraising at Weber State?
I took my fundraising job. When was that? 2018. So I went back to Weber to fundraise full time after doing community engagement with United Way. I was able to fundraise for the Office of Community Development, which is kind of like the civic engagement arm of Weber State. And was able to secure some pretty good gifts to support, like Ogden Civic Action Network is one of the biggest things I fundraise for. And we were able to lay the foundation for the Resident Leadership Network. I think they call it the Community Leadership Network now. But, we raised about $1 million to actually hire residents in Ogden to work on issues that are important to them. So it was really cool to kind of see that, like, block by block, neighborhood by neighborhood, working to make the community better on whatever issue they wanted to work on. So, yeah.
So it starts in arts nonprofit, moves to service nonprofit, then moves to nonprofit fundraising. And then that led to, what is it now that you're doing?
I work for Salt Lake City. Yeah.
But it's like financial, right?
No, I work in the Department of Economic Development. I'm a deputy director over the Arts and Culture Division. So our whole department is kind of dedicated to culture and commerce, is what we say. So really laying the foundation for our capital city to have a vibrant art scene, a vibrant business scene. One of the projects that we're working on right now is a pedestrian mall on Main Street, so permanently shutting down 2nd to 4th Street to ensure that we have a vibrant downtown of our capital city. I run a staff of, it ranges from like 8 to 14, 15 people, just depending on the time of the year. And we really just do our best to make the capital city, a city where people want to spend time and spend money and build community. So, and I've been doing that for almost 3 years now. So.
And so when was it that you first started thinking about running for office?
I actually ran for office in 2017. I didn't intend to. It was kind of a very last day of the filing period decision. I started working in nonprofits because a coworker and friend at the time, Angela Chaburka, she had announced that she wanted to run for Council District 1 downtown. And I actually started as her campaign manager. And so from like January to June, I was really helping Angela lay an incredible foundation for her campaign. And, we went to file her campaign, and the incumbent of District 3 at the time, Doug Stevens, he was there filing, and I saw him and I said, "Doug, I thought you weren't going to run." I thought, because he had said, I've been on council for 12 years and I'm kind of tired. I don't want to run. He's like, "No, I have one more term in me." And at the time, there was no other declared candidates. And I went home and I was griping to Sean, I just don't think that people should be in office for 16 years. Like, someone really should run against this guy. And I was just being, and Sean finally lifted him. He's like, "Well, then why don't you run?" And I was like, "Oh God, here we go." So the next day I was like, "Hey, I'm going to do it. I have $35." So I filed, and spent that entire summer running my first political campaign for Ogden City Council in District 3. The biggest issue of that summer was backyard chickens.
Oh, yeah.
If you remember the chicken debacle
I
of
remember
2017.
that. Yeah,
Yep.
that was huge.
It was huge. And I am really proud of that race. I had no name recognition, nobody who knew who I was. I was just some dumb kid that worked for a nonprofit doing community engagement. My message was all around like inclusion and belonging and representation. And in that election, we took a district that was one of the lowest voting districts in our entire city. Like, we just had really crap turnout from everybody. And we more than doubled voter turnout in that year. And we lost by, 300 or 400 votes. And I was really proud of the work that we did in that campaign. And more importantly, from just that campaign, we were able to lay the foundation for the next candidate, Priscilla Martinez, who ran in 2021, to run a campaign that was incredible. And she only lost by 70 votes. A woman of color coming into the scene, running against someone who had great name recognition. And Councilmember Ritchie is a fantastic council member. She really did lose to a great guy. But, there's this shift in Ogden that's happening where younger people, where people of color and queer people are really starting to come into their own and build this sense of community. And that's what we've been building for the last, 12 years that Sean and I have been in the city.
So for the record, what's your stance on backyard chickens?
I love backyard chickens. I've always loved backyard chickens.
You're in support of backyard chickens.
I am in support of backyard chickens.
Okay, that's good to know.
I am in support of backyard chickens. Especially with egg prices as high as they are. Can you even?
Right.
So
that's awesome.
And so then what was it that made you decide to get into this mayor's race now?
That's a great question. Being involved in this kind of community, in the ways that I've been involved over the years, it's really allowed me to see a part of Ogden that I wouldn't have been able to see had I been elected in 2017, right? Like, I've been really lucky in the sense that I haven't had to spend every Tuesday night from 4 to 10 stuck behind a pulpit talking about city ordinances. I've been on the streets talking to my neighbors, talking about the issues that are important to them. In 2020, when COVID hit, I remember I was the chair of the Diversity Commission at the time, and someone from the state came and presented on health disparities in Ogden City. And how even though 34% of Ogden is Hispanic and Latino, there was a huge, overwhelming health disparity for COVID, both in infection rates and in death rates. And we saw about 70 to 80% of our COVID cases in the city were in our Hispanic and Latino community. That's more than double the population, but they were sharing a huge proportion of these infections and deaths. And I looked around and I saw a lot of people spending a lot of time in boardrooms talking about the issue, but I saw nobody on the streets actually doing anything about it. So I got to work and I organized the Ogden City Multicultural Task Force on COVID-19. We convened about 30 leaders of color from the nonprofit sector, the government sector, people who just were community volunteers, and we got to work. We raised money so that the city and the county would translate critical health documents into Spanish, because all of this information of COVID was hitting us like a hurricane. I'm sure you all remember, but none of the information was being translated in Spanish. So we were able to, dedicate hundreds of thousands of dollars so that the health department, Weber State, Intermountain Healthcare, Ogden City were finally, within months mobilizing a translation effort. But not only that, I spent every Thursday night at Rancho Market passing out masks, because this idea of like, hey, a mask is a protective, a personal protective piece of equipment. We distributed almost over 60,000 masks that summer at Rancho, at the bus stops. Like, we were on the streets doing the work. And it made me realize that the change that I wanted to see wasn't in the boardroom. It was in the living room. And it made me see that there was more power standing on someone's front porch talking about the impact they can have on their neighbors than it is standing behind a pulpit and kind of talking in circles with people who think like you. In Ogden City, we held the largest testing site for COVID-19. We tested over 900 people the week before Thanksgiving because we knew people would want to be spending time with their family. So we held a test site and we told people, you're going to get tested. And if you test negative, go have Thanksgiving with your family. Go enjoy what this holiday is all about. And to this day, it remains the largest testing site in a single day that's ever happened in our state. And that wasn't organized by the health department. That wasn't organized by the bureaucrats who sit in City Hall. That was organized by us, by the community leaders who are used to engaging with our neighbors on the streets. And that's just one example of this sense of community for me that's so powerful. And, you know, I look at the city, I walk by the city building, and I see a building that's closed, right? The front doors are locked. There's a sign that says, "Do not enter." Our residents and visitors of the city who want to engage with the city have to go around the building, enter through the basement, be greeted by a security officer, walk by the jail, and, you know, the security officer says, "What's your business here?" And then you have to, you know, "I need to pay a fee. I need to visit this person on this floor." It's not a building that welcomes that sort of engagement. And for me, I see, you know, a system of our city, of our local government that's not working for the people anymore. And we, for better or for worse, I think it's for worse, we've really disenfranchised, you know, the 90 some odd thousand residents and visitors of our city from engaging with our city. And I want to put people back at the center of government. And my background in community engagement over the last 12 years lays the foundation for that to happen. You know, I said in my launch speech, the next mayor of Ogden City needs to know the names of the barbers and the bartenders, the postal workers and the police officers, the school teachers and the service members. That's who I am. And that's who I've been for the last 12 years, living and working and playing and volunteering in this city. And I've seen so many people who are eager to get involved in local government, but the vehicle to make that happen is both literally and metaphorically absent from the city landscape. So that's why I jumped into this race. It really is back to the basics. It's putting people back at the center of government. It's focusing on this idea of building community and creating connections and ensuring that young people can build their character and their foundation to be contributing members of society, right?
Yeah, well, and I have to say too that when you were in that role at United Way, and I was starting my like nonprofit
That's
organization,
right.
Love Ogden, and I think I reached out to you because I knew that you were working, and you were one of the first people that really made me feel like I had a valid idea. And you just jumped on board, and we had this really great partnership. And I think that you are someone
we collected backpacks that summer.
We collected backpacks.
That's right.
I helped with the turkey drive. But more than that, you just like gave me the confidence that what I was doing could make a difference.
It's true.
And like invested your time in and made me feel like I had the community behind me. And I think that is so powerful.
Absolutely.
And it's much more than just like, oh, I want to have all this notoriety and be this person that everybody knows and have all this power and control. That's not who you are. You are someone who will get your hands dirty and you don't need everyone else to know about it.
No.
You know, like your heart is in the right place. And I just love that about you and that
you.
you see something that needs to be done and you're like, I'm going to do it. I'm not just going to complain about it and like complain that nobody else is doing it.
Yeah.
I'm going to jump in. I'm going to figure out how to make this work and pull everybody together. And I think that is so important in a leader.
Well, and that's that sort of like can-do attitude from individuals like yourself. It's contagious, right?
Yeah.
And it's just like there's this sense of like, you know, block by block and neighborhood by neighborhood, Ogden residents are realizing that the future of our city really depends on them, right? And, you know, in the last 5 years, I'd say, I've seen this like this need for community to organize outside of the city. And I'm not saying that should ever go away. People should organize on issues that are important to them, be it backyard chickens or Love Ogden or, you know, making sure kids have backpacks. That sort of energy should never go away. But I want to ensure that the city is responsive to that. So, and even more than responsive, proactive in learning from our residents. The future of our city will be built on the ideas of our residents. It will be built on this idea that we can make change. Like I think of my neighbor, Ava. She's a part of Ogden Civic Action Network's community leader program that I helped to start. And I wrote a piece about this in the Tribune a few weeks ago with Councilmember Choburka, and she, you know, has lived in Ogden for decades. She takes her kids to the park at Lester Park. She goes to the library, and over the years, she noticed a decline in the quality of that park. She noticed a decline in people using the park. She noticed the absence of park benches and the absence of like recreational activities to do in that park. And she did something about it. She's doing something about it. Like in the next year, we're going to see a lighted crosswalk so that we can ensure that kids can cross from, one side of the street to the other with safety. And she's created these incredible recreation kits that you can check out from the park so that you can go throw a football. If you don't have one at home, you can go borrow one from the library. And she's got a cleanup crew that walks around the park to help clean it up. Like, that's the change that I want to see in city government. That's the change that I want to see amplified across all areas of our city. The answers are in our community. We just have to listen. It's really that simple.
Right. Well, that's one of the things I was curious about, and it's what you're talking about. But because I've seen you at the city council meetings, for the last 5 or 6 years, whenever something big is happening, you're kind of there and with it. But how do you do that? Like, I kind of had assumed it was like your service work and stuff.
Sure.
But I'm just wondering, like, how you stay in touch with the needs of the city, because it sounds like maybe it's not your job.
No, it's not my job. And in fact, if you go back and listen to the comments that I make at city council, more often than not, I'm talking about how exhausting the work is, right? To be politically engaged or civically engaged, it can turn into a full-time job.
Yeah.
And your average resident doesn't really have the capacity to do that when they're worrying about being a parent or worrying about where their next meal is going to come from, right? We have such a breadth of people in our city that represent all walks of life, right? And to be civically engaged is to be constantly, anxious or angry.
Yes.
But it can be more than that. And I think because I have, this decade-long reputation of showing up to our city's nonprofit fundraisers and sporting events and art activities and just, listening and watching and observing, I think it speaks volumes of the sort of energy that is inherent and readily available in our community. If we just listen, we just need to listen. It's that simple. And I don't believe that the change that Ogden City needs to see is in the city council chambers. I mean, of course, the policies we make and the ordinances we pass, those are so important. Those are vital. But your average citizen doesn't understand the difference in form-based code and, all of these jargony things that the bureaucrats of our city like to talk about, right? But they know that their neighborhood is feeling a little bit, contentious on certain issues, be it Lester Park or housing or, there are all of these issues that can really be boiled down to front porch conversations if you just listen.
So a lot of it is like Sheena, like people just know what you do and come to you for support.
Absolutely.
That's pretty great.
Yeah.
So, what are the things right now in Ogden that you're feeling most passionate about?
Yeah, I've spoken about this a little bit, but I'll expand on it. And for me, having been a public servant for as long as I've been, right? Like I started in the nonprofits, worked at Weber State, and then now I'm with the capital city kind of in the thick of it. I really believe in this premise that like public office belongs to public servants. I often tell people, city government, it's an aircraft carrier. It's not a speedboat. It takes a while to turn things around. It takes a while to shift course. Like it's a big, huge system. And so and Ogden City is no different, right? We have 600 some odd employees. 30% of our budget is dedicated to personnel, 60% to operations, and 10% to improving kind of the infrastructure of our city through capital improvements. But for me, it's this conversation of getting back to the basics. Me and Sean bought our house right in the heart of Ogden for a reason. We want to live in a community that is walkable, that has clean air, that feels safe, and where we can meet our neighbors at a park. And a lot of those opportunities aren't present. They are to a certain extent. I don't want to kind of be an annihilationist or doomsday person about this, because people will find opportunities. But it is, in my view, the city government's role to ensure that the infrastructure is there to kind of cultivate that sort of community. And so I say, let's get back to the basics. And the basics can be as simple as a park bench, right? In Lester Park, there's no park benches. There's a pavilion with a few picnic tables. There's obviously a playground with a park bench so that parents can watch their children. But, I talked earlier about how lonely I was in New York. And it was a very dark time of my life, but I worked right at the southeast corner of Central Park in a big high rise on the 44th floor or something stupid like that.
Trump Tower.
Oh no,
Just
it wasn't.
kidding.
Right across the street. And I would go into work to my internship, and I'd see the same 3 people every day, and I'd want to call my mom, I'd want to call my sister, and the feeling of loneliness was so deep that I got into this habit of bringing my lunch or buying my lunch and going to sit at going to sit on a park bench in Central Park. And Central Park is full of park benches. I dare say there's 2,000 park benches. And I very purposefully would sit at different park benches kind of around the same area and eat my lunch. And the people I met on those park benches, I have the wildest stories. I will never remember their name. I might remember a few of them, but I'll never remember, what they were wearing or the weather that day, but I'll always remember how they made me feel. And for a brief 30 minutes, they made me feel like I was somebody, and they made me feel this sense of connection to place and to people and to, this idea of community that I'll never forget. Right. And I think about Ogden, and I think about the infrastructure that our city provides to form those sort of connections, to form those sort of relationships with strangers or people you may know. And I think about what we rob our residents of and the visitors of our city. I think about what we rob them of when we do not provide that infrastructure. So when I say let's get back to the basics, I want a park bench, at least one, in every single one of Ogden City's parks. More than that, right? That's a small thing. We're talking a few $100, maybe a few $1,000 to install a park bench. But I'm also talking about the ways we connect, kind of broadly speaking, right? I am so energized by the bus rapid transit system that's being put in Ogden City, because for the first time, we're going to have an efficient and effective way to get from one place of our city to the next. And, for someone who, like myself, who chose to live along that transit corridor, I cannot wait to jump on that bus and go see a play at Weber State, or to jump on that bus and see some music down at Harp and Hound, or even jumping on the Front Runner and going to visit our neighboring cities. It's going to be easier. And that's a huge multi-million-dollar project that requires federal investment, state investment, and local investment. But it's a piece of basic infrastructure that should be prioritized, because the way we connect with people and at the local level is so important. So when I say let's get back to basics, I'm talking about the park benches, talking about the sidewalks. I'm talking about the fact that we are 170 plus years old as a city. A lot of our infrastructure is aging. What are we doing to ensure that our sidewalks are kept up, that they're wide enough to where you can walk side by side with your partner or your puppy or your kids in a safe way? Our streets are some of the most unsafe streets in the city or in the state as far as pedestrian auto accidents are concerned. Even just last week, or a few weeks ago, a crossing guard was hit in a hit and run as they were trying to usher a kid across the street. That's a big issue for me. The way we design our city should be reflective of the people who live in the city, and we should be prioritizing their needs and their wants in the projects that we undertake as a city. And I've seen a lot of energy and a lot of money, especially in the last 20 years, going to private development. And I'm not saying I'm against private development. I'm not saying I'm against incentivizing certain areas of growth within our city. But when we do that at the expense of the park benches and at the expense of an urban canopy that can keep our streets a little bit cooler in the summer heat, or slow the streets down from our very fast traffic that runs through our city, we need to be sure that we're prioritizing those needs. And again, we just have to listen. We just have to listen to the residents.
Does Salt Lake do the same kind of thing Ogden does, where they have they designate an area, the community reinvestment zone, and then is that something they do in Salt Lake?
Absolutely.
Do you have thoughts about that as a...
Yeah, I mean, community renewal areas or urban renewal areas, they're a very common practice of built-out cities, older cities like Ogden and Salt Lake City, as a way to spur private growth or public investment in certain areas. It's a very common practice. And yeah, Salt Lake does it all the time. And if you looked at a map of the CRA, URA of Salt Lake City and against Ogden, you'd probably see a similar pattern of drawing boundaries around certain areas that need private investment, public investment. So.
Right. So will you, I just kind of lost track of the Marshall White stuff. You had talked to me back when it was going on. Well, back when it was kind of up in the air, but it all kind of got resolved, right?
It's almost resolved, yeah.
I mean, maybe my question is, are people happy with how that got resolved?
You know, so the Marshall White has been Marshall White Community Center. It's been a huge issue for me. And it's been a huge issue for hundreds, if not thousands of people, right? And this is personal for me. And not because I grew up at the Marshall White Center. I didn't grow up at the Marshall White Center, but I did grow up in a community center just like the Marshall White Center. And, you know, I've said this a few times now, but I grew up pretty poor. Me and my sisters, we were latchkey kids because my mom often worked 2 jobs, sometimes 70 hours plus to make ends meet. And sometimes it wasn't enough. But I remember the year I went to junior high school, I went to a brand new junior high that was attached to a community center. And my junior high received federal funding to do a community program after school, right? And for the first time that I can remember, me and my sisters, we weren't going home to an empty apartment with little food on the shelves. We were spending time with our peers after school in a structured program that really kind of forced us to get good grades and to be engaged in our kind of school life in a way that I had never experienced. And so from 2 to 5:30, I found my love for the arts. I found my love for school leadership. I joined student government. And it really was a place that for me translated into staying out of trouble and to building a foundation for my future self to build on that I don't think I would have been able to after going home to an empty apartment watching Buffy the Vampire Slayer. Because I remember that a lot. And so for me, when I moved to Ogden and I started going to the Martin Luther King breakfast at the Marshall White Center, or I started, going to community meetings at the Marshall White Center, I saw in this building something that really saved my life. And more importantly, I started listening to the people who have these wonderful stories of growing up at the Marshall White Center. But you look around that building today, and it is ruins of what it once was when it was built in 1968, or when it was opened in 1968, rather. And, in the last 6 years, especially since the pool closed in 2017, more and more services just keep getting stripped away or eliminated from the Marshall White Center. There's no community pool. The weight room was sold off after COVID. The ceramics class was reduced to just once a week. The computers were given to a nonprofit, so there's no longer community computers for people to build resumes or do homework. And so for me, when this issue started to bubble up in 2016, I got to work and we started organizing the Save the Marshall White Coalition. And we really became a group dedicated to not only improving the building, but we looked around and said, we deserve a new building. We deserve a new building. And the great thing about the Marshall White Center is it wasn't just one demographic that was really jazzed about the Marshall White Center. You had elderly people who used the swimming pool for their water aerobics. You had kids who used the boxing rink to get their recreation. You had teenagers that loved the weight room. You had, it was everybody from all walks of life that came together and said, hey, this is an important asset to our community. And when the threat of moving the center was happening, we dug into the research on the Marshall White Center. And not many people know this, but the White family sold their home to the city and leveled it to make way for the center to be built in 1966. Wow. And so when I told this story to people, really amplified the story because it's not my story to tell, I told people this is sacred ground. And I believe that, right? Because a sacrifice was made by this family who had a father and a husband who made the ultimate sacrifice, right? Marshall White was the first Black officer in our state to be shot and killed in the line of duty. And we honored his memory as a city we made the decision in 1966 when we allocated the 300 some odd thousand for the building to be built. We as a city said, these are the values that make Ogden unique. And for 50 something years, the Marshall White Center was the only publicly owned building in our entire state to be named after a person of color for 50 years. for 50 years. It wasn't until elementary school in Salt Lake City was named after a black teacher, a black female teacher, that then there's still only 2 buildings, right? And so for me, the Marshall White Center was this larger conversation of belonging and inclusion that was being left out in this conversation of, well, recreation centers are really expensive to run and we can't afford it. And it's in a, quote unquote, bad area of town, right? So we did get what we wanted, right? As a community, we will be breaking ground on a new facility, I would hope, in the next few months. Is that everything we want? No, right? The process of government, it involves trading of, priorities. Can we afford this? Should that be that paint color? Should the layout be like this? But we had the conversation, right? And I'm a firm believer in this concept that was originally kind of coined by the disabled community when the Americans for Disabilities Act was being passed in late 80s, early 90s. The disabled community said nothing about us without us to Congress, because Congress was passing this huge monumental piece of legislation without a single disabled person at the table. And I've made 3 promises to myself, to my loved ones, and to anybody that I've talked to about this campaign. The first promise is to listen more than I talk. I'm not demonstrating that because this is a podcast.
We asked you to talk.
Yeah, but to listen more than I talk. My second promise is to always involve the people at the root of whatever issue we're talking about, right? If we're talking about police reform, beat cops should be in that conversation. If we're talking about education, teachers and students should be at the center of that conversation. And my third promise is to always admit when I'm wrong and to make the necessary repairs to ensure that whatever harm that might have occurred because I was wrong, to make sure that it is repaired. Those are the 3 promises that I know I can hold myself to. And I think the Marshall White Center is a perfect example of that. In involving the communities that are most impacted by, the lack of or the potential for a new community center in that neighborhood.
Well, yeah, I was sure the writing was on the wall when I heard the studies about, this would be more viable somewhere else. We could make more money.
Yep.
And so that was the thing I was curious about. I was sure that was something you would not be able to overcome, but somehow you did. And was it just getting the people involved, making sure that everybody, was out there talking about it?
Yeah. And, I'll push back a little bit. It wasn't me that did this. It was the hundreds of people that showed up to that council meeting. I think it's important to give credit where credit is due. And I wasn't the first person to touch this issue. I'm not the last person to touch this issue. It was the hundreds of people that showed up to the city council meeting in November of 2021 and demanded more from our local government, right? I stood side by side. I did not stand above. I'm never above. I'm always one of. I believe in that, to my core. And so, yeah, we fought and we won in a way that I think should be written about in the history books. But the story of the Marshall White Center, it's almost, perennial. This conversation of like, we're not doing enough for the Marshall White Center. Like, if you look at the history of the Marshall White Center, it's about every 10 years this conversation has popped up. We need more services. We need to throw a coat of paint on the walls. Let's get more classes going. And, I'm ready to put that conversation to bed. I'm ready to say, Marshall White Center, it's just step 1 in providing a community center that everybody can belong in. I don't believe that the Marshall White Center should be the only community center in the city. In fact, I'd like to see us expand to do more of like a hub and spoke model where, Marshall White Center, it's the core. It's right downtown. It's a few blocks from 25th Street. But what about the north side? What about north of 12th Street? What about up by Ogden High School? What about West Ogden? That's so often left out of the conversations. Mm-hmm. We can and should have access to quality community assets. And that's really what I want to spend the next, potentially 4 to 8 years as mayor doing.
Well, so I don't know a lot about that issue, but Marshall White Center is owned by the city.
Yep.
And so am I wrong? Does that get paid for in tax dollars?
Yeah. So the Marshall White Center was built on a bond, a voter approved bond that was passed in 1966. So the infrastructure was paid for over probably, 10 to 15 years.
Right.
early on. So the building has been paid for probably since the mid 70s. But the operations of it, that has been kind of back and forth. You know, I mentioned this kind of contestation of like every 10 years, what's going on at the Marshall White Center for several years, actually decades. The city did not operate the Marshall White Center. It was it was leased to a nonprofit to run as a community center. And it's only been in the last 15 years that the city took it back over and said, we'll do the operations. And, you know, during the conversations of Marshall White Center, there was a lot of conversations about the city saying, we don't want to run any community centers. That was a huge point of contention because they don't think the city's good at it. They think that, you know, it's better suited for a nonprofit to do. And, you know, right now it seems like we're in this camp of, oh, okay, the city's going to run it. But that could shift depending on who our next mayor is. If we get a mayor that doesn't want to run recreation centers, they could do the same thing that, you know, the administration in the early 90s did and said, let's give it to a nonprofit.
Yeah, that's interesting. To me, I would say if the city's not good at running it, why doesn't the city figure out how to run it?
It's a good question.
That's your answer to an issue. It's like, oh, we're not good at that, so somebody else do it.
Yeah. I mean, again, Ogden is, you know, a municipal government. We have countless examples of municipal governments across the entire country running community centers and doing it really well.
Yeah, right.
Like, you don't need to invent the wheel.
Well, yeah, find somebody that knows how to run it and then employ them, right? Like,
well, and to the current administrations, you know, give kudos where kudos are due. They are running it now, and the people who run it are passionate and informed and professional. And you know, I'm a firm believer of hire the right people and get out of their way to do their job. And it seems like that's what's happening right now with the administration and with the people who run the Marshall White Center and Parks and Rec, broadly speaking. So
the other thing that kind of doesn't make sense to me, maybe you can explain to me, is is the Marshall White Center supposed to make money for the city, or isn't that like a service the city offers to the residents? So what's the argument that like we need to move it so we can make money? Like that's not the goal of a community center, right?
No, and quite frankly, I don't think there's many examples of municipal governments that run community centers similar to Marshall White ever making money. Generally speaking, they should be viewed, in my opinion, they should be viewed as a public service, a public good.
Right.
You know, our parks don't make money.
Right.
They cost money, right? You got to water the lawn and the trees. You've got to keep the paint on the pergolas, and you got to keep the playground safe for the kids to play on, right?
Right.
Parks don't make money, and quite frankly, they shouldn't. Right. But I think that, you know, the current administration and some others in our community got tied around this idea that we should be engaging in a business model that's, you know, quote unquote, sustainable, right? Fiscally sustainable. But you know, again, the community said no. And that's not what we're doing now. It doesn't sound like that's what the plan is moving forward. And again, the future mayor of Ogden will determine whether or not that's something that's here to stay or something that's here to be shifted off to a nonprofit.
That's interesting. And I would think that the objective of that as a city would be kind of the risk versus reward. Yeah. The reward you get of having a center like that and keeping kids out of trouble, giving them a foundation, like creating more well-rounded adults, right? Like, isn't that the payoff? Like, that's what I would think it should be anyway.
Well, and again,
it's worth investing in the community in that way.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I have heard countless stories of people who are now adults who attribute their success or their survival to the Marshall White Center. And for me, I don't say this lightly, but I don't think I would still be around had it not been for my community center and the people who cared about me in that center.
Right. Yeah.
So, if you become mayor, do you see yourself pursuing any major changes in direction on some of the big things going on, like Rite Aid or Wonder Block or Union Station or even, you know, the arts district, any of that stuff? Do you see major shifts in direction?
That's a great question. I think for me, I want better voice in government. You know, I've talked about putting people back at the center. for me, it's not so much the final product of some of these major developments that have been happening in Ogden that is the problem. It's the process. It's how we get there, right? Like, I don't go to, my favorite coffee store in Ogden is Coffee Links. Shout out to Coffee Links. They're down on Park, right by the Riverbend. I don't look at the development that's happened around Riverbend and think, oh, that's ugly, or oh, that's bad, or I look at it and I see a walkable community that's dense, right? Not necessarily built for me, right? I own a house with a yard because I have dogs, and we thought about going a townhouse direction and we ended up against it. But I see hundreds of people living around a new development that really works for them, right? They can go to the brewery, they can go to grab a taco, grab a coffee. It's a great little development. The process of getting there really matters to me, right? And how we, especially when incentives are involved, especially incentives with $1 million involved or more, how we get there really matters. So you ask if there would be a major shift. There would be a major shift in the way we do things, right? For example, Ogden used to have community councils in the city, and they were undone, a little over 10 years ago. Because the administration didn't view them as productive, right? And when I talk about AVA, when I talk about residents being involved from the grassroots up, I look at community councils as a really viable and incredibly diverse way to involve community voice from the ground up. And I think about the value of what a community council would do for, let's say, the Rite Aid project, right? Right now, the Rite Aid project, and they've held a few open houses at the library. Same 12 people go. I'm one of them.
Right.
And, you go around with your little Post-it and you vote on what you like and what you don't like about the project that's being proposed. What would happen if instead of dot voting and open houses, we met on, someone's front lawn with 12 of our neighbors and discussed what we needed for the Rite Aid location. And then that information is fed into the city in a way that allows the city to respond before a plan is even developed. Right now, we do this thing where, we build these big projects on paper and we put them in a beautiful box with wrapping, and it's really pretty, and there's branding, and there's a marketing plan, and then we put it on people's front porch and we say, okay, open it, and we wait as eagerly as we can for them to open it, and they open it and they're like, what is this? I didn't ask for this. Right? What would happen if the process of making that project was by and with that community instead of to and for that community? Nobody needs to save our community. Nobody. Our communities our neighborhoods are already vital. They're already vibrant. We need someone to work with our community to ensure that an effort of placekeeping is prioritized, and that kind of cultural, that local history that's really unique to that neighborhood is preserved and enhanced. Mm-hmm. And the issues that are important to me and my neighbors around the Rite Aid are going to be very different than the issues of my friend Ella, who lives up on Taylor across the street from Mount Ogden Park. Very different issues. It's just, 10 blocks away, but our issues are not the same. So I think about this idea of a community council and what that could mean for this kind of hyper-localization of issues, and how that work could really start down and work its way into the city in a way that's meaningful and robust.
Yeah, I'd say that's exactly what I see. Like with the Union Station, there's the people who care about it, and they so many of those decisions are going to be made over 10 years. Yeah. And their concern right now is just who is going to be the steward of those decisions. So, I think that's the right approach. So, for people who want to get involved in your campaign, have you got stuff coming up? Have you got good ways to contact you, all that?
Yeah, so we have had an incredible launch to our campaign. I always knew that we would get to this moment in the campaign where we felt really secure about the number of volunteers we're engaging, the number of donors we have. I thought it would take 6 months, not 6 weeks. So we have an incredible, call it a movement, call it a campaign, whatever you want. We have this incredible core of people who have stepped up and said this message of community, connection, character, and getting back to the basics is a powerful one that's worthy of spreading. So If you want to get involved, taylorforogden.com, there's a get involved tab. If you want to make a donation, you can do that on the website. But for me, this is a grassroots campaign through and through. It will be powered by people. It will be powered by our neighbors. It will be powered by this sense of community. And I feel very good that it will propel us into a victory come November. So
great.
That's cool. Me and John have had a lot of conversations about a leader and what a leader should represent.
Yeah.
And I really believe that a good leader pulls out the leader in other people.
Yeah.
Instead of just like feeling like, oh, I'm the boss and I want all of the notoriety and I want to be in charge of this and I'll listen to you and then I'll decide if your idea is like good enough to make it, Yeah. But I think that I completely lost my train of thought.
The Taylor's different.
Yeah, I think that's what I really love about you is that you just want to elevate other people's voices.
Absolutely.
You want to create an easy way for people to connect with each other and for them to see a problem and be able to unify and come up with a solution.
Yeah.
And I'm going to support you in that. I'm going to empower you to do that. I'm going to make it more accessible.
Yeah.
And I love that. I think that's so powerful. And so for me, like the specific ideas of like what your vision is for the city and everything like that, I think that will all fall into place if your role as a leader is to pull the leader out of others.
Yeah. It reminds me, I was at an event sometime this last week, and this speaker was talking about kind of the progress of people's understanding of the stars, and how even in the primitive ages, people were looking up at the stars and seeing these little dots of light, and they didn't make sense. And so what did we do? We connected the dots to make them make sense. We made pictures and we made stories about Orion or, Sagittarius. And we started to form an understanding by connecting the dots. And, it reminded me of my work at United Way, because a lot of the times community engagement is really nebulous work. It's hard to explain. It's hard to convey to someone like the work that you do, because a lot of the time when I was working at United Way, I would tell people that my job is to connect the dots. I would get, a call from A-Fresh, and they'd be like, you know what, this truck got into a car accident and I have 4 pallets of cereal and I don't know what to do with it. And I would think to myself, oh, you know what, I was in a meeting with CCS last week. They have a shortage of cereal. And it was all about, hey, A-Fresh, CCS needs this. Let's connect the dots.
Yeah.
And that is the power that's inherent of someone like me, who's kind of grown in the community, through the community, and up into the community. That's the power of a mayor that understands connecting the dots and of bringing people together to make great things happen.
Yeah.
I will say it again, no issue I've ever worked on in this community I've done alone. I've done it side by side. Incredible, courageous, bold, innovative people who are my neighbors, who are my coworkers, who are sometimes bureaucrats of the city, sometimes, activists. That's the power of humanity, really, but of what makes Ogden this incredible city that we all have chosen to live in. We could easily, I could move back to New York if I wanted to. I could move to Salt Lake. I could move back to Clearfield, which I won't do. But Ogden's a community of choice for so many.
Yeah.
For 87 some odd thousand people that we know of. And really we need someone who understands the power of connecting the dots, understands the power of providing a microphone or a soapbox for communities to speak to the issues that are important to them. And that's who I am.
Yeah.
That's who I've always been.
I love that.
Anything else we wanted to touch on?
You tell me.
That was all my questions.
I have rapid fire
'Kay.
questions.
Oh.
Is your phone cool enough?
Oh, sure.
I didn't know a phone could overheat.
I know, especially just like it's done it sitting out in the sun, like on the beach, but
Yeah, right.
I'm cold down here.
It's cold. My hands are cold.
I know, my
I'm like
feet
shaking,
are
but it's not
cold.
because I'm nervous.
I've been feeling like, should we get you a blanket? I'm always in a blanket down here.
Turn on the heater.
Okay.
Rapid fire.
Yeah, this is like maybe a separate, maybe just for.
We're just getting content for social media.
Oh, you're fine.
So, what's your favorite Ogden restaurant?
Ooh, I have so many, but right now it is Table 25.
Okay. Favorite local nonprofit?
Ooh, that's a loaded question.
It's hard. Pick a
loaded
favorite.
Question. I don't have a favorite. They're all so great.
Okay, do you have a top 3?
Top 3. I love YCC. The work they do is so important. Youth Futures is such an important organization. And I would say United Way because it's where I came from.
Good answers. Favorite local business in Ogden?
Ooh, that's another good question. I love Coffee Links, the sense of community that you can build there. They're a great place to get some work done, and they have a great cheesecake.
Oh, okay.
They do.
Good to know.
Best cheesecake in town.
Okay, what's your favorite local place to just hang out?
Ooh, I love the Dumpke Arts Plaza down on Ogden Ave on 25th. It's like an unknown gem. People don't know that you can actually like hang out there.
What's it called?
The Dumpke Arts Plaza.
Okay.
And literally like especially in the warmer months, I will take my lunch down there and sit on that bench.
Yeah, they've got like that tire art and stuff.
Yes.
They have a bench.
Well, and not many people know that's Shakaya Booker. She's like one of the like best known and like awarded Black female artists in our country. She's got work at the Met and in Paris. She's an incredible artist, and it's right here in Ogden that we have 4 of her incredible sculptures. So
cool. Who is someone who's making a difference in Ogden?
Ooh.
Like first person that comes to mind.
First person, it's Ava. Ava, like I literally, her work has been a few years in the making, and I wrote a piece with Councilmember Choburka on this, but the work she's doing to change Lester Park is going to be transformative for my community, for our community.
Morning person or night owl?
I'm a morning person. I wake up like every day at 6 and I get my little coffee, sit in the hot tub, read a book.
A hot tub.
Morning hot tub?
Yes, morning hot tub.
That sounds nice. What's your favorite type of music or favorite artist?
Ooh, that's a great question. My background is in theater, and so I said that I'm not a pop culture person, and so it's probably just like show tunes. I know it's weird. I know
it's not weird. I love it. It's unique to you.
But if I had to pick like a pop culture person, it's Ben Platt, who kind of started on Broadway, but he has some really fantastic work. And like talk about representation. He's a gay man himself, and writes music about the queer experience and falling in love. And that's not music I ever listened to as a kid. So it's really powerful representation. So
cool. What musical has the best soundtrack?
Oh, right now I'm listening a lot to, 6. It's a new musical on Broadway. That's a really good one. And, Into the Woods just did a revival, and that's got a great soundtrack. So.
Okay. Do you have a hidden talent?
Hidden talent. I mean, I have my degree in musical theater, so I can sing. I don't do it often, but I can.
Oh, give us a line.
No, never. Never. Sound like my mom.
I do know your mom very well, so that makes sense. Okay, answer this question. The way to my heart is?
Quality time. Quality time through and through. Like, just like sit with me and watch a movie or play Monopoly, which Sean will never do with me.
Same.
I know. I even bought Ogdenopoly to see if he would play with me.
Yeah.
And he will still, it's literally sitting on our coffee table because he will not play Ogdenopoly with me.
Well, I will.
Okay. It's on.
Okay. When you were little, what did you want to be when you grew up?
Ooh, that's a good question. Really, honestly and truly, growing up the way I did, I kind of touched on this earlier, but I didn't spend a lot of time dreaming about the future because life was pretty hard. But when I found my passion for theater, I always wanted to do theater professionally. And I got to do that a little bit. Mm-hmm. And now I don't do that very often. But there's still opportunities to do that locally, like Good Company Theater. Shout out to the Washington Sisters. I performed a few times over the last decade with the Washington Sisters.
I love what they do.
They do such good
work. Okay, last question. Do you have any tattoos?
I do. I have a few. I've got one on my arm that me and my sisters have together. It says, "Love you much." It's my grandma's handwriting.
Yes,
my grandma died
that.
when I was at 14, and this was written on my last birthday card from her. So we all got it. We all have matching tattoos.
Mm-hmm. Do you have others that you want to share?
I got a $10 tattoo in Vegas the last time I was there, and it's just a little ghost.
Where is it?
It's on my ankle.
Okay.
And then when I lived in New York, I actually got a tattoo that said adventure just right here. Because Sean and I don't do New Year's resolutions. We do kind of intentions, and we have words. And that year in 2015, our word was adventure. So I got it tattooed as a little reminder. And then I have a tattoo of the mountains on my calf that my mom and I were at the Ogden Farmers Market one day. And she was like, I really want a tattoo. I was like, let's get one. And so we walked into Legacy and I said, we want matching tattoos. So she has one on her back between her shoulder blades, and I have one on my calf. And mine is a upside down triangle, and hers is a right side up triangle, kind of like my feminine and masculine
The
mirrors
yin
of
and the
each other,
yang.
because my mom is my hero. So
Yeah. I love that.
Yeah.
Well, that's all I've got.
Okay.
Boom. We did it.
We're done.
Thank you.
Thank you. It's been fun.
That was fun.